Hey friends, and welcome back to the Above Board podcast. Today I am delighted to introduce Mitch Matthews to our show. Mitch is the creator of the Dream, Think, Do podcast. He's also a success coach, speaker, and serial entrepreneur. His Dream, Think, Do podcast helps people to dream bigger, think better, and do more of what they were created to do. It's been rated #1 by the Huffington Post and is in the top 1% of all podcasts. And he's been wildly blessed with some amazing guests like best-selling authors Brendan Burchard, Michael Hyatt, Jamie Kern-Lima, along with celebrities like The View's Sarah Haynes and The Biggest Loser's Jillian Michaels. In addition, he's been able to talk with Oscar winners, extreme athletes, and successful entrepreneurs. But Mitch is often quick to say that some of his favorite conversations have been with lesser-known folks who have done extraordinary things. Plus, as a speaker and elite success coach, he spent the last 20 plus years helping organizations like Nike, United Airlines, NASA, and Disney. Mitch has also built a business training program that has helped thousands of life and success coaches from around the world to build successful and profitable businesses they can be excited about. But above all else, he's a husband, a dad, and a lifelong learner living a highly caffeinated life in Des Moines, Iowa. Mitch, what's up, buddy? Welcome to the show.
Oh, John, it's so good to be here. Thank you so much. That was an amazing intro. I love it.
It's an honor to have you, man. As I was reading this intro, I'm like, what can this gentleman not do? I mean, Mitch, you're a renaissance man. You do a little bit of it all.
There are a number of things. I just try to stay to my lane, man. I just try to stay to my lane.
Brother, I have so many questions for you. And again, thank you for coming on to the show. And I think maybe that's a good lead in to one of your podcast episodes you did, I believe it was earlier this year. It was episode 386. And it's this epiphany that you had called the Everything Everywhere Fallacy. Yeah. And I think that might be a good starting point. I loved hearing you share that on your episode. So if you don't mind, maybe just take a couple minutes to run through that with our listeners.
Absolutely. I love the timing of this because honestly, that epiphany hit me at just about this time last year. And it's kind of a funny backstory. I'm sure your listeners will understand this and appreciate it. But I do a lot of my work. I'm a coach, like you said. I'm a speaker and go out to speak at events and conferences and things like that. But I do a lot of coaching with leaders and entrepreneurs and other coaches and speakers. And all of that coaching I do via Zoom. So I don't have to leave my office, which is an introvert's paradise, right? But I had one particular client, very, very good client, great human, love the person. And he's very, very successful, has multiple homes. And he let me know he was going to be in town. Like you said, I'm from Des Moines. And he said, hey, I'm going to actually be in Des Moines. Could we meet face to face? And I really manage my time and really manage my schedule. So I love Zoom because I know exactly when a meeting is going to start. I know exactly when a meeting is going to stop. I can kind of control that. And as you know, meeting somebody for coffee kind of throws that out the window because the human dynamic enters in. But this guy had been a long-standing client and a friend, all those things. So I said, and it's rare that I would get to see him. So I said, you know what? You bet. And I threw out a Starbucks because why wouldn't you? And he's like, I think I know exactly where that is. That's great. Absolutely. And I said, okay, that's awesome. And I sent him a calendar invite, included the Starbucks in there, all that stuff. And sure enough, that morning I get there, I scheduled it. So it would be the first thing that I did that day, all those things. And as the clock is ticking closer and closer to the time that my client is supposed to be there, no one's showing. No one's there. And I'm not happy to admit this. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it, but I can kind of feel myself like my heart is starting to race. I'm starting to get maybe even a little offended, a little frustrated. I'm thinking, okay, great. My whole day is going to be off. If I'm just, if he shows up 10 minutes late, he's probably going to want to go 10 minutes over, which then throws out my next, client and my whole day and all this stuff. And I started to get more and more frustrated. And again, I'm not proud of this, but it's so true. Like, and being transparent, it is wildly true.
I think everyone listening to this can identify with that feeling because you've got, we all have scheduled days, that feeling of like it mounting on top of the next one. And now we're going to be, the whole day is going to be delayed. It's such
here it is first thing in the morning. And I'm already thinking my day's thrown, like my day's done, right? It's all toast. And here I am. It's a brand new Starbucks. John. Like, it's gorgeous. And I'm sitting there drinking my great cup of coffee. I'm sitting in this beautiful space and I am frustrated. And I start to look around, and almost everybody that I can see that's sitting in the same beautiful Starbucks, drinking the same beautiful Starbucks coffee, they all look frustrated too. And I'm like, what is going on? This just seems bizarre. What is going on? And in those moments, I'm a big believer in prayer. I love prayer. And I believe you can pray from anywhere, and, including but not limited to a St. Arbucks, right? So in this Starbucks, I just pray, and I love a short prayer. God is good, but also I think he appreciates, I like simple messages. So I prayed, Lord, what lie am I believing right now? And it's a good question. I love that. It's a great conversation starter when it comes to prayer. And sometimes I don't get anything, but on that particular morning, I got this phrase: you're believing the everything everywhere fallacy. The everything everywhere fallacy. And like immediately, I think we were joking before we hit record. When I get hit with a phrase like that, I'm not that smart, John. So when I get hit with a phrase like that, I'm like, that's not me. Like, I don't even know what that means. So that was my next question as I'm praying. I pray, what does that mean? And I believe that God was saying, you believe that you need to be everywhere and you need to do everything. And that's a fallacy. And he said, look around, everybody else is believing it too. Mm-hmm. And I did. I started to look around this, Starbucks, and I'm looking at people answering emails or checking social while they're supposed to be talking to somebody else, and doing something else and taking a phone call, but still working on their computer and all that. I'm like, oh boy, that resonates. Yeah. Like, that is the everything everywhere fallacy. And if I get hit with a lie, like, okay, what lie am I believing right now? And I get something like that, I'm believing the everything everywhere fallacy. I always ask, okay, if that's the fallacy, what's the truth? And then I hear this 3-word phrase, because God knows I have a simple mind and he loves me and he keeps things simple. He said, if you're believing the everything everywhere fallacy, the truth is one place well. And again, I'm like, I love that, but I don't know what that means. What does that mean? And he said, everybody's believing the everywhere, everything fallacy. Mm-hmm. But all I ask you to do is to be one place well.
Wow.
Just be in one place and do it well. Be fully there. Love the people around you. Bring your best. And then move on to the next thing. Don't try to do 15 things at once. Just do one place well. And I felt like he was saying, and guess what? I'll meet you there.
I love that, man.
When you go one place well, when you focus on one place well, he's like, I'll meet you in that moment, because God is omnipotent, right? He is beyond time and space and resource, all that stuff. But the place he meets us is this moment right now. Right. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, I think I can do that. I could try. I said, let's just try right now. Like, how do I be one place well? And he's like, well, maybe you could try to be a little less offended. And just when this person shows up, just love them well. Just be in this one place, do it well, love them well, bring your best, and it will work out. So that's what I did. And almost on cue, this client walks in kind of flustered, and he said, I so apologize. I was like, that's okay. I said, it wasn't, it's so not like you showing up late, because it was about 12 minutes into the hour at this point. And he said, well, it's interesting. He said, I thought I knew which Starbucks you were going to, or that you were talking about. And I saw it in the calendar invite, but I had it in my head which one. And I went to that one, and it wasn't that one. And then I clicked on the link and I realized this is the one. And he said, it's only 5 minutes away because it's Starbucks. Right. But he's like, hey, I'm so sorry for being late. And I said, well, actually, it's kind of funny. I think maybe God might have sent you on a little wild goose chase, because he knew he and I needed to have this conversation first. And he's like, what are you talking about? And so then I walked him through the one place well, and he's like, that's exactly what I needed. And so we talked about one place well for the next hour, how we were going to try to just do one place well just for that day. What would
Yeah.
that mean? He had some client meetings coming up. He was selling some things and kind of doing some big transactions and things like that. And he's like, okay, well, what does being one place well mean for those kinds of meetings? Not being 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years in the future, not ruminating on the past. What does it mean to be one place well with these people? What does it mean to be one place well when I get to actually see my wife tonight when I fly home? What's
Mm-hmm.
that one place well going to look like at home? What's one place well with my team tomorrow? And so we wound up spending the rest of that hour fully vested in one place well. And interestingly enough, we ended up on time. We felt like we'd spent about 4 hours together, and we walked out. I just said, hey, I think this was kind of a divine timing meeting. One, my conversation with God, and now our conversation. And so I know I needed it. So I went home and just turned that into a podcast episode, because it's amazing how that has really, whether somebody believes in prayer and has a faith background or not, I think that is one of those truths. I always say God's truth is, all truth is God's truth. If it's true, it's God's. So I know there are people that maybe don't have a faith background, but when they hear one place well, they know they need it too. And
Yeah.
those that have the faith background go, oh yeah, that's so God.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of those that, and just like you do with your podcast, I always say, if I need it, there's a good chance at least one other person needs it. So I'll share it as a podcast episode. So I'm glad it resonated with you, because I know it was a game changer for me.
Well, I appreciate it. And I was reflecting actually yesterday, just in preparation for our conversation today. I'm like, why do I want to I keep going back to this concept. I'm like, thinking
Yeah.
about, what do I want to talk to Mitch about? And I keep going back to the everything everywhere fallacy. I'm like,
Yeah.
why do I want to talk to Mitch about this so bad? And certainly, like, it's awesome that you shared that story in your podcast, because it clearly
Yeah.
it's impacting your listeners. It impacted me, but that's something I've struggled with this year. I mean, I've talked a lot about this through the journey of our podcast, and I joke, I'm wearing this Whoop band that tracks all my
Yeah.
data, and I realized just how constantly stressed my central nervous system is. Like, I'm always just thinking about the next thing, the next place I need to
Yep.
go to, the checklist that I got to do, the meeting I need to have, the call I need to make. And I'm so constantly worried about the next thing that I'm not even presently being in that one place well that you talked
Yep.
about. And my wife is, I talk about this on the show a lot too. Like, I give her permission to call me out on my BS, right? Like, of
Yep.
course, as any spouse
Absolutely.
should be able to have that. And she'll say to me, John, sometimes, like, I pride myself on physically being present as a dad a lot. Like, I'm there with my
Right.
kids a lot. I pick them up from school. Like, I do a lot with my kids, and I pride myself on that. And she pulled me aside one day, and she's like, you're physically there a lot, but you're not mentally always present. And that one really hit me in my feels, because I just thought, oh my gosh, I think I'm doing this great thing, and here I am. I know what I'm doing in my internal dialogue. I'm worried about the next thing.
Yep.
I got to be everywhere at all times, and I got to be everything to everybody. And so it's cool hearing your podcast, because this morning specifically, I took my daughter to school. And again, thinking about all the stuff I got to do, but I'm like, I got about 12 to 15 minutes in this car drive. Let's go ahead and maximize that time. Like,
Yep.
Ella needs dad, and she wants to
Yep.
have a conversation with me and tell me about what she's excited about for the school week. Let's be one place well. So, it's just funny in reflecting, thinking about my conversation with you. I'm like, why is this what I want to talk to Mitch about so bad? I have like 17 things, but this was number one. And I think that's why.
I'm glad you brought it up, but I'm more importantly glad you did it with your daughter, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the beauty of it. And I think it's so true. And now, especially, we have two sons that are both in their 20s. And I look at sometimes, parents dropping their kids off from school. And I can remember how stressful that was, and somebody doing the loop wrong in the school, and it just upsets everybody. Everybody's frustrated. But I look at those families and I look at those parents now and just go, oh, treasure that time, because it's truly the habits that you establish now
Mm.
are the habits that pay off much later, down the road. And it's interesting, about our younger son. is in LA. He's a working actor out there and, is in the throes of early actor life in LA, which is pretty stressful and, things pulling at him all the time. But we always made time, especially on Sunday nights, to do dinner
Mm-hmm.
at the table, no distractions. And it's interesting. He's been out in LA for about 6 years now, and we still do supper together on Sunday nights, and we set up the iPad in his spot on the
Cool.
table, and we just sit. And last night we talked for a couple of hours, just like we would on Sundays, right? And it's that thing of, our older son is in the military. He's home right now, so like I look at that and was reflecting on that last night that we screwed up a lot as parents, but that was one of those just like tried and true rules that became a habit, which has become, kind of it's the seed got planted and watered that we're still enjoying the shade from today, So it's that, yeah, it's the beauty of it. So well done. Well done on the drive, man. That kind of stuff. It's the
Thanks.
little stuff that makes all the difference.
Well, and like I said, I think this whole year has been that's been really a theme for me is trying to get better at this. And so hearing your podcast just came in at the right time. Sometimes those things hit you at the right exact time. Like
Yep.
that's
Well,
happened to me
that's one of my
before. Like,
prayers before every podcast is like literally, Lord, help people to find this when they need it.
mm,
And it's hilarious. That prayer gets answered all the time because, we mess around with ads for different things that we do on Facebook and social media, those kinds of things, but we don't do anything to promote our podcast with ads. But literally we'll have people reach out just going, oh, I just found this episode and I love it. And it's like, that episode's from 3 years ago. Like, how did you find that episode? And they're saying that like, I needed it today. Thank you so much. And I just have to give credit to God on that one. Cause I'm like, well, you were directed there. That was divinely timed. So
I love that.
I know you cover the same kinds of content that people just need.
Mm.
And I know that's probably your prayer too, is that they just find it when they need it.
Yeah, amen to that, brother. It definitely is.
Yeah.
So, Mitch, I have a question for you, and it's kind of in line with the first topic, but I've
Yeah.
heard you share this a lot on your podcast that you're a recovering perfectionist, and
Yeah.
I identify with that feeling too. And so I'm kind of curious just to hear straight from you, like what are some practices that you deploy? And it might be the one place well. I don't know if that's turned into a mantra for you, if that continues to be a prayer as you need to like revisit that and think about
100%.
that. But
Yep.
to define yourself as a recovering perfectionist means that you're probably still presented with those issues of
Oh,
perfectionism
I am
daily.
tempted
Yeah,
every day.
me
Every
too.
day. It's one of those that, and I don't think that perfectionism is one of the things you beat. I think perfectionism is one of those things you identify and you
Hmm.
strategize and you can overcome, but it's a day-to-day choice. And what's interesting about perfectionism, and I love this topic because it's so under the radar for so many people. It's misdiagnosed for
Hmm.
so many people because I think a lot of times when people hear the word perfectionism and a perfectionist, then they think, oh, a perfectionist desk probably looks perfectly organized all the time, right? A perfectionist, probably their living room, everything's in its spot. There's nothing out of place. Could probably be on the cover of Elle Decor this weekend. But what's funny about perfectionists is we're pile people, right? Like that's just one thing I always say. Like if you are a person that goes to a meeting and you come back from that meeting with a binder or a handout or a participant's guide, there's a good chance if you're a perfectionist, you put that on the corner of your desk. You set it there because you don't have the perfect place to file it yet. And you
Hmm.
tell yourself, I'm so going to find the perfect place to put this. But until I do, I'm going to leave this here. Right.
Hmm.
And then you go to that next meeting, or you go to that next conference, you go to that next thing, and boom, and it just piles until you find out somebody's coming over to see see you at your office, or they're walking down the hallway and you're like, and so you need to take your pile and you generally will put that under your desk, or you'll put it in a bag, or you'll put it in a box, or you'll put it in an extra briefcase or whatever. Right. And it just expands. It's hilarious how pile people are perfectionists. One of the other things often that gets misdiagnosed is procrastinators. A lot of procrastinators are procrastinators not because they don't care about time.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, if you are the person that is not sending that report that's due until midnight, if you're not sending it, at 11:57, right? Just minutes before, or maybe in college, you did the same thing with reports, essays, exams, whatever. You were sending them minutes before, or maybe just minutes after. The reason for that probably it wasn't about not managing your time. You probably are really good at starting stuff, but because you're a perfectionist, the last 10% is always the hardest because it's not perfect. And so you need a deadline to force you to actually get it done, right? The deadline is what establishes that thing of, well, it's not going to be perfect, but it needs to get done. I'm sending it, right? So that oftentimes a lot of people are like, oh, I just thought I was a procrastinator. I didn't realize that's perfectionism, right? And I'll never forget, for me, like, that was so under my radar until I ordered this book called Too Perfect, and it's all about perfectionism. And I'll never forget, I bought it from Barnes and Noble because I wanted to, like, go into the store, see it, all these kinds of things. It wasn't on the shelf, so I had to order it. And then they let me know it was in. So I went, and I don't know if you've ever seen this book, but the paperback is brilliant because I got it. I got out to my car. I start thumbing through it, and something just didn't seem right. And what they had done is they had printed it and cut it so that one side of the book was just slightly off. And
That's
they were like,
amazing.
basically, the third paragraph or something like that. They were like, by the way, if you are just frustrated immediately by our book, here's what we did and here's why. And that is also a diagnosis. You've got problems with perfectionism, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, so busted. So, oftentimes perfectionism starts with the goal of having or delivering a high level of excellence. It starts with wanting to do an amazing job. It starts with, wanting to amaze a client or a customer or a teacher or a professor, right? It often starts, the roots of it can be good, but what winds up happening is it gets, that behavior gets more and more extreme and more dangerous and detrimental. And so for me with perfectionism, I just have to watch those things where I start to creep in and start to white knuckle things that I don't need to white knuckle, or I'm tempted, like we were talking about before, to try to be everywhere and try to be everything, and to say, you know what, today I am enough, right? And to be able to say, hey, how can I deliver excellence in this thing today?
Yeah.
Or how can I be at my best? Or how can I help somebody else to be at their best in this moment? And it's those kinds of things that help me to, one, kind of manage my own expectations, but two, also get the things done. Because I know for me, that's the kind of thing that would cause me to lose sleep, where I should have just gotten done with the project, sent it on at 5 o'clock. I was still ruminating about it at 11:30 at night, and not, as you said, I was there present with my family through the night, what wasn't really fully there with them. It was oftentimes perfectionism that was robbing me of that. So I just had to get to that point of saying, hey, B plus is a passing grade, or done is better, than not. And so I had to start managing those expectations, and it started with me and my mindset first. And boy, it made all the difference.
I love that quote, B plus is a passing grade. Because I have to tell myself this a lot, man. I was smiling a few minutes ago when you were talking about this, looking at the pile on my desk that you can't see in the shot of this video if you're watching us on YouTube, that has a book, a binder, some loose leaf papers, some marketing ideas written down. It's just
Right.
it's that stack of things that you referred to where you realize, like, you're not a procrastinator, you're just a perfectionist. And
Yep.
I think for me anyway, my industry, being in managing someone's finances, their money, their investments, you really, my business partner Matt and I have really leaned into this idea that, like, we got to be as perfect as possible all the time.
Right.
And that's an impossible expectation
It
to
is.
be 100% of the time. And so
Yep.
sometimes I tell myself, like, just take an imperfect step in a direction. It doesn't even have to be the
Yep.
right direction. It's just kind of like, get off of the inaction, just go do something. And
Yep.
another way to say that is a B plus is a passing grade. It doesn't
Yep.
need to be perfect. And I mean, that's a struggle for me. So, I
It
mean,
very
just
much
hearing
is.
hearing you share that and realizing like, oh gosh, I'm not procrastinating. I'm just every project needs to be perfect. And then the worst thing that happens to me is I'm at the dinner table thinking about the project that I should have submitted, that should have been done a week ago, but I'm
Yep.
still like, nope, I got to put the finishing touches on it,
Yep.
and so something that I've been trying to do this year is really empower my team to take on certain projects and go like, hey, it's like you make the final on certain things, not everything, but like
Yep.
you make the final call on certain things, because sometimes just not even being burdened with that of a decision where I'm like, I know my team can handle that, and I don't need to like add this to my plate and then nitpick at an idea. I don't know if that if
It's so true. And I love that because I think, especially when it comes to leadership, right? What's interesting is we as perfectionists
Mm,
will often think we have to be involved to the very end,
yeah.
right? And we think that's the best way for us to bring the most value is to be involved with every detail to the very end. But what's interesting, especially when it comes, as you well know, when it comes to team members, what's interesting is that often is translated as, oh, my leader is not holding me capable.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a phrase that I often have to ask myself, because I do believe in surrounding yourself with really intelligent, really talented people. And I'm wildly blessed to say that I've got an amazing team. But truly, I have to remind myself, hey, how can I hold this team member as capable?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that can mean, hey, sometimes it's about setting expectations for the project. But I love to say, hey, what does success look like in your mind? What does success look like for this project? Or in your mind, what does success look like with this client? And what's interesting is I found that if they can verbalize what success looks like, and one, if they're able to verbalize it in a way, they're going to be much more likely to achieve it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I agree with them on what success looks like, I also need to hold them as capable of finding the way to deliver that. Now, I
Yeah.
make myself available to talk through it, and we do like to, talk through different strategies, how it might work. But one of the things that, they talk about, that especially in the United States, we're at an all-time low for engagement at work. So, like, what's interesting, you've probably seen this, but active disengagement is at an all-time high, which active disengagement is basically acting to look like you're doing the work, but not. And
Yeah.
active disengagement basically means you're probably putting in as much work, faking work, as you would to actually do the work. You know what I mean? And that's
Right.
just tragic when you think about it. That just makes my heart sick and sad to hear that that's what's going on in the United States. But one of the best ways to increase engagement is to increase autonomy, not misguided autonomy, and also not like, hey, just, put you out in the dark and say good luck. It's autonomy to say, all right, once something's clearly defined, as an example, as a target, as long as we agree on what success looks like, the autonomy to actually get that done skyrockets
Yeah.
engagement.
Yeah. I would imagine, I'm sure you're seeing these articles too, but over the last year, we've seen more and more employers call people back into the office,
Oh yeah.
probably erroneously thinking that's going to resolve the issue
Right.
of that disengagement. And frankly, whether you're a virtual work environment or in an office work environment, that level of disengagement can happen anywhere across the
Anywhere.
board. It's
Yep.
probably actually to their detriment to call people back into the office at this point and then make them do something further that they don't want to do, would be my hypothesis. But I guess time will tell, and we'll see how that
Right.
how that shakes out.
There are all sorts of work studies going on right now finding that the work from home kind of policy that started during, all of the craziness of the last few years, they are finding that it is not effective.
Yeah.
I was actually asked to come in and speak at a headquarters of an organization. They had just spent millions and millions of dollars, updates and remodels to this headquarters right before the pandemic broke out. And they asked me to come in. They were having a kind of all employee meeting. They had called everybody in for this day to kind of celebrate the year and all these kinds of things. And I was brought in to speak to the whole organization in this big, beautiful headquarters. And afterwards, one of the organizers, one of the team that was putting the thing together said, "Hey, our CEO would like to talk to you in his office." And John, I was a little bit like, "Uh-oh, am I getting called to the principal's office?" Like,
Yeah.
"Uh-oh." And they pull me in to the CEO's office, and it was gorgeous. I mean, it was straight up out of, a movie with floor to ceiling windows looking over the city, just spectacular and breathtaking. And the CEO, very humble person, very successful person. They ushered me into his office. He invited me to sit down, and I jokingly said, "Am I getting called to the principal's office? Did I say something you didn't want?" And he's like, "No." He said, "I loved every word that you said, but I have one major problem." And I said, "Okay, well, what's that?" And he said, "Help me keep these people here."
Hmm.
And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, working from home is not working. It's just not." He's like,
Yeah.
"What do we need to do to make this so that people come back?" And I said, "Well, I think you're asking a question a lot of people are wrestling with right now." And, there is something to being able to be flexible and give people a day or maybe a couple of days during the week where they can be at home. I said that cow's out of the barn. People have tasted that. It's going to be hard to completely move away from that model. But there is something about getting humans into a room together that like you just can't beat. And I think some organizations can be virtual, absolutely. But whether you're virtual or not, the big thing I think you're talking about here, and I said, is getting people on the same page of what
Yeah.
success looks like, but then also, allowing them some autonomy to be able to achieve it, but allow them to experience what it's like to actually be in the same room again. I
Yeah.
said, you're doing that, you're giving them a taste of that with this big event, but it's that thing of there is something about human interaction and being able to connect that I think a lot of people are missing. So I said it's probably, finding that healthy mix. But I said your biggest thing is ask them, because
Yeah.
I said you've hired talented people. They want to keep some of the home stuff, but I'm guessing they're also feeling it too. So involve them. Don't try to keep it from them and then just unleash this plan on them. Involve them, help, get them in on the conversation of what it might look like to establish a new day, a new process, how you want to do this together. And he's like,
Mhm.
"You know what? You're right. We were trying to process this all, like coming up with the system without them." He's like, that they're the people who are going to have to walk it out. Why wouldn't we involve them?" So I'm
Of
like, "Yep,
course.
that's what I would recommend." It's easier said than done, but they are actually working on some pretty innovative approaches. And most of the ideas, most of the new solutions are coming from within the
Yeah.
teams and within the organization, as opposed to having some consultant come in and tell them how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're probably certainly a bigger organization than we are. We have a team of 7, but something that we've deployed over the past year, actually 2 years now. So we come into the office as a team like twice a month. So I mean,
Yeah,
we're
that's
it's
great.
completely virtual. And I think like you said, there's something to be said for the level of interaction that can happen behind a Zoom versus in person. There's a
Yep.
deeper level of collaboration and appreciation of one
Yep.
another and just like work that can move at a different speed, I think, when you're in person, which is cool. But one of the things, I don't know if you've ever taken the Enneagram type test before.
Powerful stuff. Yeah.
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 So I'm holding this up for those of you watching this, but I'm an Enneagram type 3, and we had an Enneagram coach come in, Tracy Weiss. She's been on the podcast. She came in
Yeah.
about a year ago, and we all took this exam, this survey to kind of figure out who we are, and then we all came together and talked about it. And then we
Yeah.
tried to come up with strategies of like, how can we work together? Like, I'm a type 3, you're a type 8. How does a type 3 and a type 8 personality, like, what's the most effective communication skills that we need to be thinking about and working together? Because, sometimes like we look at life in our own lane and we think someone's seeing it the same way we are when in fact they're definitely not. And to that
Right.
end about leadership, one of the things I know about myself as a type 3, which is called an achiever, is that when I'm in a non-healthy space, I tend to take my ball and go home. Like I'm
Yep.
like, I'll do it myself. I got it.
That's it.
I'll just do it myself. I'll do it myself. I'll do it myself. And that sends a really confusing mixed signal to my team, like you said, with
Yep.
empowerment, where it's like, no, I got it, or send it my way, I'll approve it. And like I said earlier in this podcast, like what I'm trying to let go of is that a little bit. But I think what's useful is that my team knows this about me. So if they
Yep.
see my meeting cadence is like 20 to 30 meetings a week and I'm really busy, we probably should make sure, like, just to check in on John and make sure he's not trying to do everything himself, because that's sort
Yep.
of where my personality lens. I can give honestly countless examples just as a team of 7. And so maybe it's too difficult for a large organization, but maybe within
No, I
one's
think in some
department, I think
ways,
it's good.
what I love about something like that, whether it's Enneagram, there's obviously a number of different kind of personality indicators, those kinds of things. I think those kinds of things are such a healthy conversation because it helps people to realize we are at times speaking different languages. It's funny. My wife and I, a few months ago, got to go to Brazil and help with a ministry there, doing some really cool things. But it'd been a little while since I'd been in a community or in a country where I was surrounded by people who didn't speak English, right? And in Brazil, you probably know they speak Portuguese, which I really don't. Like, I'm not great at even Pig Latin, for crying out loud. I'm not even mastering the English language a lot of days, right? But it's so interesting because we were with a group of about 100 people. Most they were Europeans and Americans. And what was so interesting is that we would go and help with these events, and oftentimes there would be 1,000 to 2,000 people at these events. So it was a lot of humanity in the room together. And what I saw as a common characteristic between our team, which again were Europeans and Americans mostly, and then the people that we were helping, which were mostly Brazilians speaking Portuguese, is that the first attempted solution when communication wasn't happening was to just get louder. And it's funny because logically, like, our team of people, pretty smart people, and the people that we were helping, obviously very smart people, right? They just needed some help. But it was so funny that this was a common characteristic of almost every first conversation was, oh, you don't understand me. I'm just going to speak louder, right? And it's so funny because I mean, it was comical in some
Yeah.
ways, but what you needed a translator to come. And once the translator would come, the volume level decreased, the communication increased, right? And I think in many ways, like the Enneagram, that conversation can function as a translator to go, oh, John's just speaking as a 3. I'm a 7. We need to talk, like, let's meet in the middle here. Here's how we can do it. And I love, whether it's Enneagram or, again, a number of the different indicators that are out there, as long as we realize we need a translator and we can use that translator. Cause I know for me, we could do pretty amazing things even in Brazil, especially, even when my translator wasn't great. If my translator was pretty good, we could get a lot more done than me and this person that we don't speak any language at all, any shared language at all. We couldn't get much done. But once we had a translator, even a C+ level translator, we could get so much more done. So I love, Enneagram and many of the others that really do at least get the conversation started.
That's such a great way to think about it. I don't think I realized that the Enneagram has really just been a translator tool
Yeah.
for our entire team. And it's also certainly something that we can now connect over, but
Yeah.
it's a translator tool. That's really
Yep.
all it is. And anyway, it's been immensely powerful for us. But Mitch,
That's good.
before I let you go, we got a couple more
Yeah.
minutes
Yes.
if you do as well. So just indulge
Of
me. I've
course.
got one final question for you. How is Mitch Matthews thinking about 2025 goal planning? As this
Yeah.
is being aired, it's probably the second or third week in January.
Yep.
Do you still write and set goals? How
Yes.
are you doing that? I know you've had Michael Hyatt on the show. I
Yeah.
actually use the Full Focus Planner still to
Yep.
this, like, I'm like
Amazing.
6 years in with this thing, and that's what I use. But
Incredible.
curious what
Yes.
you're using.
Michael's amazing. I love him. And I love him as a person. I
Yeah.
mean, he's truly a product of the product, right? Like he really does use it. And you can just tell just this sense of peace and calm. Like that's not something he fakes in
Yeah.
his, presentations and podcast. That's who he is. And I love it. So I know for me, especially this time of year, one of the things that we do with Dream Think Do is the third week of January, we claim as reset week. And the reason for that is, Most people, when they go to New Year's, say, I'm going to set some New Year's resolutions. The data on this, but New Year's resolutions generally last anywhere from 24 to 72 hours. That's it. Like the long standing New Year's resolutions make it 3 days, but most of the time they're down, in flames within 24 hours to 48 hours. And a lot of people say, well, people aren't committed and da da da. And I actually think New Year's resolutions aren't a bad idea. It's just the wrong time of year. Like I love to set a time aside to do this kind of activity, but doing it at New Year's, like I get why we would be tempted to do that. But generally, in the New Year's, we're coming off of probably a week, if not 2 or 3 weeks of parties, celebrations, get-togethers, weird schedules, weird menus, weird sleep patterns. And so, we come to New Year's, it's the new year, we step into the new year, but we're not at our best. And so I actually think that's one of the big reasons why New Year's resolutions fail is not because they're a bad idea, it's just the wrong time. So that's why we claim the third week of January as reset week to say, hey, this is the week to do it. This is the week where, menus have gotten back to normal, schedules have gotten somewhat back to normal. You might have some credit card bills due, but mostly your spending's back to normal, all those kinds of things, right? So part of it is give yourself some grace to say, okay, my New Year's resolutions didn't make it 12 hours, let alone 12 days. That's okay. Let's try it again this week, this third week or whatever week, you're listening to this. No matter when you're listening to this, give yourself some grace, right? First and foremost, give yourself some grace. And then what I like to do, and it's something we're in the process of doing right now, is to say, okay, I always love to set 3 big goals, 2 for the business, 1 for my life. And there are more than that, but there are 3 kind of like, these are the focus of the year. And then for the business, as an example, I will set a couple of, they're pretty black and white numbers. And I always say, all right, what is the goal? But why is that goal important? And to be able to say, okay, what do we want to achieve? What do we want to experience? Those kinds of things. Why is that important? And we do put black and white numbers to that. For us, as an example, one of our big goals is the number of coaches that we're going to train this year. God put on my heart to train up, to go deep and really train up 150 to 200 coaches. And we've been able to impact thousands of coaches, but the vision for doing this is deeper than we've gone before, which I'm really excited about. So first off, what you have to do is to say, what is it, right? And then to say, why is that important? And I know for me, it's a good goal for our business, but a big part of that why is what I feel called to do as well, what I feel like God's put on my heart, which is a big part of my wiring. Doesn't have to be anybody else's wiring. Your why is still important, whether it's faith-based or not, to say, why does that matter? Why is that important? Why do you want to see more of that in the world or more of that in your organization? Those kinds of things. So ask the what and then ask the why. And then when you start to break down the how, what you want to do is you want to break that down into, months. So as an example, it's funny. I have a coach, I'm a coach and I have a coach. And just this morning, I actually had a conversation with my coach and I walked him through my grid that breaks down the what, breaks down the why, but then in the how, I've broken out the 12 months and to say, all right, if we're going to hit this number, then most likely this is what it's going to need to have happen each month for that number to be achieved. But it's funny because my coach was even like, oh, I need to do this. Which is that I appreciate your transparency. It's great. He coaches me on a number of things. But when we walk through this, then I was able to say, okay, these are pretty big numbers, but I believe this is achievable if we break this down and if we're able to do that. And so I always say, describe your what, get clear in your why, especially in your heart, but then in your how, break that down over the 12 months. And that starts to become a lot more doable. I know it's trite, but it's true is, how are you going to eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So you have to do the same thing with those big goals. And I know for me, as my inner perfectionist starts to rage to say, well, I have more than 3 goals. This is insane. I have 10 goals. I have 20 goals. It's like, yes, I do. But I'm only going to do this process with the 3 most important because I have a feeling, and I just know from past experience too, when I take care of those three, everything else seems to fall in order.
Yeah. That's really good advice, because I think sometimes people have a list of like a dozen different things they want to
Yeah.
accomplish. And if you really were to objectively look at it, a lot of those can probably roll into one, two, or three
Yep.
categories. And then those pieces fall into place as you achieve that bigger goal. And it's what honestly, like I held up the book a moment ago, but the full focus planner for me has been so good because it breaks it back, it breaks it down into 90-day windows,
Yep.
which I know we talked on the pre-call about Gino Wickman and traction in EOS
Yeah.
too. And like, I don't know, because of Michael Hyatt and Gino Wickman, like my world lives in these 90-day segments. Like that's how
Yep.
far my brain can go out. So we do
Exactly.
this vision planning of 10 years and 3 years and 1 year. But then I have to have something daily that I can say, like, these are my habit goals that are helping
Yep.
me work towards that. And then for, again, also a recovering perfectionist, I think I'll paraphrase you, but give yourself grace and be one place well. I think that's
Yeah.
also kind of a good undertone in all of that. You know, you're 7 months into the year and you're not happy with, hey, gosh, I haven't made progress on this one goal. Maybe it's okay to give yourself a little bit of grace.
Yep, absolutely. Because it's and there's just so much there. Because I agree with you. The 90-day window is
Yeah.
so powerful because I mean, I know that things have always changed, right? Like when I think about my grandpa, him navigating, mining in the coal mines of Iowa, then going and navigating, being in World War II on the, in the Pacific Rim, fighting for his life, coming back home, entering into a factory. Like the changes that happened in his life, those were dramatic and
Yeah.
sweeping. And I'm grateful for his generation, but the speed of innovation, I know again, it's almost trite to say, but no generation has seen the innovation and the speed of innovation like our generation is seeing.
Hmm.
So I always say it's good to have clarity on the things you want to achieve, but oftentimes the how, it literally can change in 90 days or less, right? Like when you look at the tools like we have now, as an example, using AI, like some of the ways that we're using AI right now, we were not even aware of 6 months ago,
Yes.
let alone really even 3 months ago, right? So, I always say if you understand the big picture of what you want to achieve, planned in 90 days. I believe in that wholeheartedly just because it'll give you a finish line that's not so far off that you don't feel
Hmm.
like there's any accountability or clarity, but at the same time it is realistic for how fast things are changing for us to say, hey, you know what, there might be a whole new tool set or at least a tweaked tool set that we don't even know about that we might have at our disposal by June of
Yeah.
2025, right? So, hold loosely to the how, get the things done, say, this is what we know based on what we know, in this 90 days, this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
But I totally agree. And the sprint mentality of traction I think it's great, especially for perfectionists, because we often tend to have short attention spans too.
Sure.
So let's be honest. Like, I know there are times where I put an elaborate year-long plan in place and got bored with it in about 3 days, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, you know what? Let's keep it fresh with these sprints too. And it really does. It makes it all a lot more effective. And it allows us to be, like you said, one place well more often.
Well, I think it helps me with the enormity of the goal sometimes. Everything I
Yeah.
need to accomplish in 1 year to get to that feels like a lot. But if I have some subset goals that can roll into that I can do in the next 90 days, it just lets me stay hyper focused. And to
Yep.
that end, like, as an entrepreneurial personality, I come up with new things all the time where I'm like, oh, wait, what about, like, we should add this in. And my team's gotten really good at holding me accountable. They're like, no,
Yeah.
John, like, we set our quarterly rocks in place. This is what we're doing this quarter. We'll
Yep.
put it on the issues list and look at it next. So, but like
I
you
had
said,
I had a business partner on a project for a couple of years, and one of the things we would set these goals in 90-day sprints, but we had this thing when either one of us would come up with this new bright shiny object idea, we would come to each other, and then the first phrase was, "When we are a sound mind, we made this plan. So we are going to adhere to this plan. So I so agree with you. I love it. And what I appreciate about the work that you're doing and with your podcast and all of that, you are putting so much good in the world by setting your sights for excellence, not perfection.
Yeah.
And I think people can truly, they feel that, when they listen to this podcast, when they're like, all right, I want to go above board, right? To be able to say, okay, I'm going to focus on bringing excellence as opposed to perfection. And that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, amen, man. I really appreciate the kind words, and I think I'll end the podcast with how we started it, which is be one place well. I think
Yeah.
that's where I'm going into 2025 thinking about and the impact of that podcast. So, Mitch, this was awesome getting to chat with you again. Selfishly, this is one of the reasons I love our show so much, because I get to learn and talk with experts like yourself. So, thanks for hanging with
I
us on the Above Board podcast. Before we let you go, what's the best place? I know mitchmatthews.com, but where else would
Yep.
you like listeners to go to find and follow
Absolutely.
you?
So mitchmatthews.com is a good place to start. That's kind of where our world kind of orbits around, all of those things. I know that we are helping a lot of people to become coaches, either full-time or part-time. I know a lot of your listeners are successful people who probably want to have more impact and probably have a lot to share that the world would be wildly blessed by. So we really love to encourage the encouragers. That is the coaches and speakers that are bringing thoughts and strategies into the world that are very needed. So if people want to find out more about that and maybe even find out how to get started on something like that, they can go to mitchmatthews.com /5CQ. And that's the 5 critical questions. That is a list of questions that we say everybody should ask themselves before they move into the coaching and speaking space. And I know for a lot of people, it saved them a lot of time and a lot of money by being able to understand and navigate these questions. So if they want to go check that out, then go to mitchmatthews.com /5CQ.
And we'll make sure to add that into the show notes as well.
That's
But
awesome.
Mitch,
I love
thanks again, man. It was good chatting with you. And as always, thank you, listeners, to the Above Board podcast. We love these conversations. We love our community of listeners. If you prefer to watch these conversations like we just did, instead of just listening to them, head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe to our podcast. You can find us at Candor Path or search the Above Board podcast on YouTube. Thanks as always for listening to our show today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.